Hey, 6th grade, Mr. Herzberg here. It's Wednesday. We've made it through the middle of the week. To be specific, it's Wednesday, April the 22nd, which means Tom Sawyer and a journal. So let's get started with going over our homework from Monday night. And we're also going to go over our journal for today. And then we're going to read a little bit more into Tom Sawyer. And then we'll go from there. So let's go over the homework from last week. It's like most of you turned it in. Great, great, great. Okay. Why did Tom Sawyer run away from school? Who wants to tell me? Because Becky Thatcher, and him wanted to go kind of out, and they wanted to be together for the first time. Becky got mad at him, because he slipped up and said he dated Amy Lawrence. So he runs away from school because he upset her so. And whenever Tom gets in trouble or makes someone upset, he always runs away. Why did he want to run away? Because he felt like Becky didn't love him anymore and nobody loved him anymore. He's very melodramatic. Whenever Tom gets his heart broken or gets in trouble, he gets super melodramatic and the whole world is against him. What's a superstition? A superstition is a belief that has no scientific value behind it. It's just a silly sort of thing. When Joe arrives, what book did he and Tom act out? Robin Hood. Tom was Robin Hood, and I believe Joe Harper played the Sheriff of Nottingham. Why did Tom play hooky after his argument with Becky? Because he can't stand to be around all these other happy kids at school while he is sitting here heartbroken. Why is it so easy for Tom to play hooky? Because his emotions, he gets so swept up in things when he gets upset, he can just run home or run out of school, and poor Aunt Polly, she's got her hands full with Sid and Mary, her biological kids. Her adopted kid, Tom, he gets away with a little bit more, and so he doesn't think as much. Why won't Tom fall or die when he and Joe are sword fighting? Because that's not the way it was written in the Robin Hood books. He tells Joe, Robin Hood never dies. The Sheriff of Nottingham does. Therefore, while we're playing this, we have to be exactly like the book. Where are Tom and Joe when they are fighting? They are just on the outskirts of town in a little forested area. From what famous story does their fight come? Robin Hood. Name at least 3 characters Tom and Joe pretend to be: Robin Hood, the Sheriff of Nottingham, and Guy of Gisborne. What was the attraction Tom had for becoming a pirate? What other occupations does he consider before deciding to be a pirate? So he goes through and says, well, I want to be Tom Sawyer. I want to be this new character, Robin Hood. Then he goes through and says, I want to be an adventurer. And then he finally settles on Tom Sawyer of the Black Avenger. And he decided to be a pirate because he thinks pirates can do anything they want. Nobody can bother them. No girls can break their hearts. They can steal, plunder, do as they will. Okay, cool stuff. Let's take a look at today's journal, and then we're going to get started with the next chapter of Tom Sawyer. You're going to read about Stonehenge today. Stonehenge is a structure in England, and they're not quite sure what it was there for. Some think it's a calendar. Some think it was put there by aliens. It's mainly probably something left over from the Druids that lived there, and it was some sort of a gathering place, but no one's 100% sure. You're going to read a little passage about this. This is standard RI 6.2. Again, we're reading informational text, persuade, inform, and entertain. In this case, you're going to be informed, and you're going to tell me the central idea of those 4 paragraphs about Stonehenge. What specifically about Stonehenge did the author want us to focus on? The history of it, the purpose of it, what people think of it now, all that kind of stuff, okay? Remember, give me about 5 sentences. All right. Chapter 9, Tom Sawyer, here we go. At the end of chapter 8, you saw, as usual, Tom gets his heart broken. What does he do? Or he gets in trouble with it. What does he do? He runs and pretends. So they hid their accoutrements. They go off grieving that they were no outlaws anymore, wondering what modern civilization could claim to have done to compensate for their loss. They said they would rather always be outlaws in Sherwood Forest than president of the United States forever. So they are claiming they're going to run away from home forever, Tom, Joe, and Huck. And they're going to determined to be pirates for eternity. Kids, I have a feeling that won't last very long. So we're going to start into chapter 9. It goes from page 60 all the way to page 65, just 5 pages. I'll read a little bit and then I'll give you the rest of it. A solemn situation, grave subjects introduced. Injun Joe explains. At 9:30 that night, Tom and Sid were sent to bed. As usual, they said their prayers, and Sid soon was asleep. So the boys have returned home. Obviously, their time of running away forever as pirates didn't last long, and Tom is back home in bed. Tom lay awake and waited in restless impatience. When it seemed to him that it must be nearly daylight, he heard the clock strike 10. This was despair. He would have tossed and fidgeted as his nerves demanded, but he was afraid he might wake Sid. And so he lay there still and stared up into the dark. Everything was dismally still. By and by, out of the stillness, little scarcely perceptible noises began to emphasize themselves. The ticking of the clock began to bring itself into notice. Old beams began to crack mysteriously. The stairs creaked faintly, and evidently spirits were abroad. A measured, muffled snore issued from Aunt Polly's chamber, and now the tiresome chirping of a cricket that no human ingenuity could locate began. Next, the ghastly ticking of a death watch on the wall at the bed's head made Tom shudder. It meant somebody's days were numbered. Superstitions again. Then a howl of a far-off dog rose in the night air and was answered by a fainter howl from a remoter distance. Tom was in agony. At last he was satisfied that time had ceased and eternity began. He began to doze. In spite of himself, the clock chimed 11, but he did not hear it. And then there came mingling with his half-formed dreams a most melancholy of caterwauling. The raising of a neighboring window disturbed him. A cry of, "Scat, you devil!" and the crash of an empty bottle against the back of his Aunt Polly's woodshed brought him wide awake. And a single minute later, he was dressed and out the window and creeping down along the roof L on all fours. He meowed with caution once or twice as he went and then jumped off the roof of the woodshed and thence to the ground. Huckleberry Finn was there, with a dead cat. The boys moved off and disappeared into the gloom. At the end of the half hour, they were wading through the tall grass to the graveyard. It was a graveyard of the old-fashioned western kind. It was on a hill about a half-mile wide from the village. It had a crazy board fence around it. It was leaned inward in places and outward in the rest of the time, but stood upright nowhere. Grass and weeds grew rank all over the cemetery. All the old graves were sunken in, there not a tombstone on the place, round-topped worm-eating boards staggered over the graves, leaning for support and finding sacred to the memory of so-and-so had been painted once or twice, but it could no longer have been read. One of the most of them now, even if there had been light. A faint wind moaned through the trees, and Tom feared it might be the spirits of the dead, complaining at being disturbed. The boys talked a little and only under their breath, for the time and the place and the pervading solemnity and silence oppressed their spirits. They found the sharp new heap they were seeking and enclosed themselves within the protection of 3 great elm trees that grew in a bunch within a few feet of the grave. Then they waited in silence for what seemed a very long time. The hooting of a distant owl was all the sound that troubled the dead stillness. Tom's reflections grew apace. He must force some kind of talk, and so he said in a whisper to Huck, "Huck, do you believe that dead people like it for us to be here?" Huck whispered back, "I wish I knowed. It's awful solemn around here, ain't it?" "I bet it is." There was a considerable pause while the boys canvassed this matter inwardly, and then Tom whispered, "Say, Huck, you reckon Hoss Williams can hear us talking?" "Of course he does. Least his spirit does." Tom, after a pause, "I wish I'd seen Mr. Williams, but I never meant any harm. Everybody calls him Hoss. A body can't be too peculiar, though, how they'll be talking about these year dead people, Tom." This was a damper, and a conversation died again. Presently, Tom seized his comrade Huck's arm and said, "Shh! What is it, Tom?" And the two clung together with beating hearts. "Shh, Huck! There it is again. Didn't you hear it?" What is it, Tom?" "There. You hear it now?" "Lord, Tom, they're coming. They're coming for sure. What are we going to do?" I don't know. You think they'll see us?" "Oh, Tom, they can see in the dark, same as cats. I wish I hadn't come with you." "Don't be so afraid.
I don't believe they'll bother us. We ain't doing no harm. If we kept perfectly still, now they won't notice us at all.
I'll try to, Tom, but Lord, I'm all a shiver.
Shh, listen.
The boys bent their heads together and scarcely breathed. A muffled sound of voices floated up from far above the graveyard.
Look, see here, whispered Tom.
What is it? Oh my God, it's devil's fire. Oh, Tom, this is awful. Some vague figures approached through the gloom, swinging an old-fashioned tin lantern that frecked in the ground with innumerable little spangles of light. Presently, Huck whispered with a shudder.
It's the devils, Tom, sure enough. 3 of them. Oh, Lord, Tom, we're goners. Pray with me, Tom. I'll try, but don't you be afraid, all right? They ain't gonna hurt us, Huck. Now, let's go. Now I'll lay me down to sleep. Shh. What is it, Huck? They're human. One of them is, anyway. One of them's Muff Potter. No, it ain't so, is it? I bet I know. Don't you stir nor budge. He ain't sharp enough to notice us. Drunk, yeah, as usual, likely. Blamed old Rip. All right, I'll keep still. Now, they're stuck. Can't find it. Here they come again. Oh, they're hot. Cold again. Hot, wait, red hot. They're pinned right here this time. Say out. I know another one of the voices. It's Injun Joe. If that's murdering half-breed, I'd druthers there was a devil's darn sight. What are they up to?
The whisper died wholly out, for now 3 men reached the grave and stood within a few feet of the boy's hiding place.
Here it is,
said one of the voices. The owner had held the lantern up and revealed the face of young Doc Robinson. Injun Joe and Potter were carrying a hand barrow with a rope and a couple of shovels. They cast their things down and began to open up one of the graves. The doctor pulled the lantern at the head of the grave and came and sat down with his back against it. He was as close as the boys could have touched him.
All right, men, he said in a low voice. The moon might be coming out at any moment.
They growled a response and went on digging. For some time there was no noise but the grating sound of the shovels discharging on the gravel. It was monotonous, and finally a spade struck the coffin with a dull accent. Within a few more minutes, they hoisted the coffin to the ground. They pried open the lid with the shovels, got out the body, and dumped it on the ground. The moon drifted from behind the clouds and exposed the pallid face. The barrow was got ready and the corpse placed on the wheelbarrow, covered with a blanket, and bound its place to the rope. Potter took out a large spring knife and cut off the dangling end of the rope and said,
Now, the cussed thing's ready, Sawbones, and you'll just out with another 5 or here she stays. Yeah, you tell him, said Injun Joe. Look here.
What does this mean?
said the doctor.
You require and pay in advance, boys? I paid you.
Yeah, you did.
And you done more than that,
said Injun Joe, approaching the doctor, who was now standing.
5 years ago, you drove me away from your father's kitchen that night. When I come asking for something to eat, you said I weren't there for any good. And when I swore I'd get even with you if it took 100 years, your father had me locked up in jail as a vagrant. You think I'd forget about that, Doc? The Injun blood in me ain't for nothing. And now I got you. And you don't got to settle. You know it.
He was threatening the doctor with his fist in his face by this time. The doctor struck out suddenly and stretched the ruffian to the ground. Potter dropped his knife and said,
Here, now, don't you hit my partner!
And the next minute, he grappled with the doctor, and the two were struggling with might and main, trampling the grass, tearing the ground with their heels. Injun Joe sprang to his feet, eyes flaming with passion, snatched up Potter's knife, and went creeping cat-like and stooping. Round and round about the combatants went, seeking for an opportunity, and all at once the doctor felled Potter to the earth with it, flung himself free, seized the heavy headboard of William's grave, and knocked Potter to the ground. And in the same instant, the half-breed saw his chance, and Injun Joe drove the knife to the hilt in Doc Robinson's chest. He reeled and fell partly upon Potter, flooding him with his blood. And in the same moment, the clouds blotted out the dreadful spectacle, and the two frightened boys went speeding away into the dark. Presently, when the moon emerged again, Injun Joe was standing over the two, contemplating. The doctor murmured inarticulately, gave a long gasp, 2 or 3, and then was dead. The half-breed muttered, "The score is settled."
Damn you. Then he robbed the body, after which he put the fatal knife in Potter's open right hand and sat down in the dismantled coffin. 3, 4, 5 minutes passed, and then Potter began to stir and moan. His hand closed upon the knife. He raised it, glanced at it, and let it fall with a shudder. Then he sat up, pushed the body from him, and gazed at it. And then around him, confusedly, his eyes met Injun Joe's. "Lord, Joe, how did this happen?" he said. "It's a dirty business," said Injun Joe without moving. "What'd you do it for?" "I never done anything, Potter." Look here, now, that kind of talk ain't gonna work." Potter trembled and his face grew white. "I thought I'd gotten sober. I had no business drinking tonight. But it's in my head yet, worse than when we settled here. I'm all a muddle, and Joe can't recollect anything. Tell me, honest now, Joe, old feller, did I murder him? I never meant to, poor old soul and honor. I swear to God I didn't, Joe. Tell me how it was, Joe. Oh, it was awful, and him so young and promising." "I'll tell you what, Muff. You two was scuffling, and he fetched you one with a headboard, and you fell flat to the ground there. And then when you got back up, all reeling and staggering like, and you snatched the knife and, you jammed it into him. Just as he fetched you another awful clip, and here you laid, as dead as a wedge till now." "Oh no, I didn't know what I was doing, Injun. I wish I may die this minute if I did. It was all on account of the whiskey, I tell you. The excitement of everything, I reckon. I never used a weapon in my life, Injun Joe, I swear it. I've fought, but never with weapons. They'll all say that. Joe, don't tell. Stay now, you won't tell. Be a good feller. I always liked you, Joe. And I stood up for you, don't you remember? You won't tell nobody, will you, Injun Joe?" And the poor creature dropped on his knees before the stolid murderer, clapped his appealing hands. "I'll tell you what, Muff, you've always been fair and square with me. I won't go back on you. There now, as fair as a man can say. Oh, Joe, you're an angel. I bless it for the longest day I live." Potter began to cry. "Come on now, that's fast enough of that. There ain't time for blubbering, Muff. You off beyonder, and I'll get to this. Move on now. Don't leave any tracks behind you." Potter stared and trotted quickly, increased to a run. The half-breed stood looking after him, and he muttered, "If he's as much stunned with a lick and fuddled with the rum as he had look of being, he won't think a knife till he's gone so far, be afraid to come back in such a place by himself. Chicken-hearted." And then 2 or 3 minutes later, the murdered man, the blanketed corpse, the coffin, the open grave were all under no inspection but the moon. The stillness was gone too. So that's the end of that chapter. Wow. Injun Joe murdered Doc Robinson, and Muff Potter got blamed for it because he was drunk and passed out. So you probably want to know why they were digging this grave. Well, back then, doctors didn't have access to bodies to study. They needed cadavers. And back in the 1800s, doctors weren't allowed to use cadavers because they believed it was disrespectful or unholy to operate on a body after it had passed away. So doctors back then, they had to dig bodies up in the night illegally, take them back so they could perform scientific experiments on them and learn about the human body. So that's what the doc was doing, and he paid Muff and Joe to help him. Little do we know, Injun Joe and the doc had a history, and Joe wanted revenge on him for throwing him in jail one time. So do the questions tonight for homework. Oh my gosh, and by the way, Tom and Huck saw the whole thing and got out of the graveyard without being seen, so that's a lot on them. Do the homework. See you at the Google Meet from 1 to 1:30 if you have any questions. I'll talk to you guys tomorrow.